Welcome to the Stay Spicy podcast, where we have honest, fun, and spicy conversations about being your authentic self. We are your hosts, Lynette
and Sheri, and we are coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, located on Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. Stay Spicy is on a mission to build the community and tools to help you on your journey in becoming your most spicy self.
We've got workshops, personal branding services, podcasting, merchandise, and more. Check it all out at stayspicy.ca.
Welcome back to the Stay Spicy podcast. We've been talking a lot about leadership this season, what it is, what it isn't, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we've had quite a few spicy moments, haven't we, Lynette?
We sure have. We've had some really good ones. Lots of fodder for new merchandise.
Yes. We've got some great new quotes. I don't know how Instagram friendly they are, but they can definitely go on t-shirts and mugs. So stay tuned for that. On that note, I think this entire episode might be a spicy moment. And the title is
not Instagram friendly.
Our show title is kind of a giveaway. It's called Fuck Up and Fix It. Yep. So what does that actually mean? Today's episode is centered around the topic of failure and mistakes as part of the leadership journey, but also how it relates to success of teams and organizations. There seems to be a lot of buzz around fail fast, embrace failure, just sort of like a buzz phrase that we're hearing a lot. I'm sure, I don't know if this is a product of the pandemic or what, but you see stuff about normalizing failure all the time now. So you're seeing books on failure, talks on failure, panels on failure, events, quotes. It's really about normalizing those discussions, but it's also positioned as sort of a way to encourage creativity, build supportive culture, and get proactive about finding solutions around failure. Mm-hmm. But on the ground, in your workplace, in your organization, where you volunteer, is it real? And do leaders have the support they need to encourage failing fast? What do you think?
Well, I also want to call out when you talked about the episode title, we were talking before we started recording about the fact that I think this is the first episode that we've ever actually had a swear word in the title of the episode. So we've gone you were saying we had boss holes. That's like an implied swear word. We had an episode last season called the F word.
Right.
But now we've gone full fuck.
Yes.
This episode title. And I like it. I like how spicy we're getting.
I like it too, but as a tech person on the team, I know I have to add asterisks when we get this thing up on Spotify and whatnot, but you know what?
It's worth it.
It's another year with no grants.
Yep. Yeah. No sponsors means lots of fucks.
Fuck it.
Okay, so, what does this all mean? What do we mean by fuck up and fix it? Since we like to be, this is like the understatement of all understatements, we'd like to be a bit provocative on the Stay Spicy podcast, hence the name Stay Spicy. Mm-hmm. We're going to call out normalizing failure as another leadership myth of sorts. And this is one I think I've been thinking of for a while as a bit of a leadership myth, and it's just been I've been chewing on it. So what do I mean by that? I guess, should leaders be encouraging people to fail and fail fast? Have we even asked ourselves that question? Is that something we should be doing? And not that I'm saying we should all over ourselves, but is it even feasible for people to fail fast in some workplaces? Like I think about, we used to work in government type environments, and that's just not even possible to fail fast or to fail at all. And then what's the actual goal? Is it trying new things? Is it learning? Is it being adaptable? Is it being resourceful? Well, that's not the same as failing. And failure, though, can be a step on the path to that. But if we're sitting here and celebrating failure, I think we're actually incentivizing and celebrating the wrong thing. So I think that there's a difference between the theory of embracing failure,
right,
and delivering that philosophy in practice. And that's more what we're going to talk about today. It's not that we necessarily disagree with taking the fear out of failure, but I think leaders and organizations are missing the mark with how they're trying to do this right now. And that's the leadership myth. So I'll give you an example. I've seen some leaders try to normalize failure by talking about it in team meetings. And one, I think I may have referenced this in season 1, but one in particular, in a big group team meeting, this leader brought up a meeting that was scheduled by one of the team members and was kind of quizzing them about it and getting them to tell the story. But as I think he was trying to be funny, but as the person was telling the story of this meeting that he set up that didn't end up being a good meeting,
Right.
He kept saying like, "Oh, I was ready to kill him," and just like making comments like that. So it was also kind of humiliating. But by forcing this person to talk about a quote unquote failure, which I think setting up a bad meeting isn't a failure, quite frankly, in front of everyone, it became more of a shaming exercise, which actually made other people more fearful of failure and of being kind of called out to be publicly humiliated in front of their peers. So there's a nuance to this, but I think, again, focusing on the failure is the wrong thing. And certainly focusing on other people's failures can be problematic.
And I think this goes back to what you've said in previous episodes, is let the person who made the mistake or learned from it tell the story. Give them the space, give them the platform to tell it how they want to tell it, talk about their learnings. It's all very personal. It's a very personal...
But don't force them to tell it.
Exactly. So I think that takes it away from being a public shaming exercise when you actually allow the person to talk about that. So I think that's an important nuance for sure. So, you know, and this kind of comes back to the idea of like failure being the grandfather of creativity. You know, we're planting seeds. We hear all these words, right? Are they bullshit? Maybe. In some cases, I think they are. So, we hear a lot about how ideas are king, how we fail fast, how we learn from our mistakes. But we are constantly seeing resistance to these solutions. So everyone knows about, the work from home conversation. This is a massive conversation that's been happening in the past couple of years. And 33 million Americans are going to be working from home in 2025. So researchers Morissette, Dang, and Messakar in 2021, they estimated that a transition to full telework capacity could lead to a reduction of annual emissions, greenhouse gas emissions of 9.5 megatons in Canada. So we have right here a creative solution to lower GHG emissions. The research also found that it could make us more resilient for future pandemics because there's less work interruptions. So we have that solution on lock as a result of all of this. And also studies have revealed that roughly 40% of Canadian jobs can be done from home. So the pandemic hit. This is to me, this is like the biggest fuck up and fix it situation. We had total chaos. Yeah. We had a global pandemic, totally unprecedented. We found solutions. They started to work. People got creative, and it actually changed the workplace forever. Mm-hmm. So why is there so much pushback from these major companies who use words like innovation? They use words like creativity, and they're forcing everybody back to the office. What do you think about that as somebody who's led teams around the world? Lynette, what are your thoughts on here's a solution and now we're going to ignore it?
Yeah, or we're going to try to turn back the clock. One of my thoughts is I love how much you love statistics.
You got to bring them. You got to bring the evidence.
She's dropping the stats, dropping it like it's hot. I think, again, we're going to be spicy this episode because, the title calls for it. But
right.
So, we've seen many of the jobs can be done from home. But one of the jobs that I think people struggled to do from home was the job of leader. And that's what you're seeing is that so many of the leaders that we have in those positions right now feel that they cannot lead unless they're in their office and they have their team physically around them, and that's what they're comfortable with. So they are forcing everything back. And what I find just super ironic is okay, we're going to force everybody back. But then while you're sitting in your cubicle, please do try some new things and feel free to fail at them. And then share your failures with the team because we encourage new thinking and innovation here. But you have to physically be here.
Yeah, like which is it? I'm real confused.
Yeah, I'm getting some mixed messages here. So as you mentioned, I have worked with global teams. I continue to work with clients globally. And I used to lead a team of people that were stationed all over the world. In fact, they were so dispersed that it was challenging to find a time that worked for all time zones. So everybody was pretty much equally miserable except for Europe. But so because of that, we didn't have the option to just hang out in the office together. And yeah, sure, it was more challenging to effectively lead a team and build a certain culture. But it's possible. And as a leader, you have to get creative about how to build the culture you want, which includes risk-taking, creativity, and innovation. And that's really what we're trying to get at here with this whole topic of fuck up and fix it, and this topic of failure is like, it shouldn't be the focus on failure. It should be a focus on how do you foster a culture of creativity and trying new things and innovation. And you can't do that if you as the leader aren't willing to model that behavior, if you're not willing to try something new and you're forcing everybody back to a traditional paradigm.
That's exactly it. And so, this is a lot of, I think, smoke and mirrors, right? So we have, here's a great way we can ESG win, right? People are happy. We're contributing to the environment. We're doing the right thing. And we're going to put that in our annual report as a priority, across the board. This is a global thing. And when we have the solution handed to us on a platter, it's like, we're not going to do that. So this is where we get sort of suspicious, I think, around the whole idea of failure and mistakes. Because what are we doing with it? You can create a culture all you want. You can talk about it all you want. But what are you actually doing with it? So we want to kind of pivot, I think is the word we're going to go to. But we're pivot the conversation now around how do we create the culture of embracing failure, fuck up, fix it. How do we do that? And the first thing you've talked about often is, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who works in these spaces, is the idea of changing it into the idea of pivoting as opposed to focusing on fail.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I should also talk about the origin of this phrase, fuck up and fix it. This might not be a leadership gold star for me, but we were talking about this with a previous guest about, was going on vacation one time and my team was kind of freaking out because it was a longer vacation. I think I was going to be gone for 3 weeks. Right. And they're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I said, well, you're all very smart, talented, capable people. You'll be fine. And if there is some kind of emergency, I'm available. But also that I kind of said sort of in a joking way, but I was like, well, if you fuck up, just fix it before I get back. But as much as I was kind of joking, that was the culture that we had built because we were valuing being able to adapt and course correct and things like that. And that's what then enabled people to feel comfortable trying new things, because it wasn't about, okay, we're gonna try them and we're gonna fail. So we're gonna try new things with the understanding that if you're gonna try something new, you're not gonna know how to do it properly or correctly or perfectly. And so you're going to make mistakes. If you want to call those failures, fine. You're going to have fuck ups. And then what are you going to do with them? And that's not the end result. So that's why I go back to failure is not, we're talking about it as though it's the end result. And I want to reference Andrea from season 1. She had this absolute nugget where she said, failure is a step on the path to greatness.
Right. But you got to get on the path.
Yeah. This is my issue with this whole embrace failure stuff, because we're embracing the wrong thing. So when we talk about pivots, that's where we want to look at, is like, instead of talking about failures, we should be talking about pivots. What did you do with the failure? Instead of measuring success by how high we climb, we should measure it by how high we bounce after we hit the ground. And instead, I feel like the buzzwords about fail fast and talking about failure is is looking at when we hit the ground as that end result. But I was like, no, you got to bounce.
Yep.
So I think for me, it's about changing our language, whether you call it pivoting, whether you calling it fixing things. And so I had meetings with my team instead of saying, and I think it's a small nuance, but it's a big difference. So we talked about that leader that said, talk about your failure, talk about this thing you fucked up, basically in front of everyone. Mm-hmm. And instead, what I did was I had team meetings where I explicitly said, we're going to talk about pivots. So we're going to talk about things that didn't go the way we wanted them to go, and what have we done with them to either course correct, or what have we done to say, okay, we tried this thing, we don't want to do this again. So we're going to incorporate these mechanisms to prevent it from going that way when we do something like that again. And so we called them pivots. So I think language, we talked about communication. Language is big for both of us. And I think that's my biggest issue with the failure thing is calling it failures at all.
Yeah. And I think you're building resiliency, and resiliency is you're building that safe culture that allows people to talk about mistakes and failure, but also builds resiliency. So like, okay, yeah, but like, let's move on. It's forward thinking, it's resilient. And I think that's how you create work culture. So like, you're not just focusing on the failure. And for me, I see it as the same in my industry, creating a culture of learning as opposed to just, there's a lot of pressure in public relations, consultancies, all of that. I work in digital communications, so a lot of technology, very technology heavy. Things are always changing. Social media platforms are always coming out. So there's this pressure, I think, in traditional PR is to be the expert, is to know the answer, is to have all of the answers. If you are a digital consultant, you know that tomorrow or next year, TikTok doesn't exist, or whatever the situation is, right? So you have to position yourself as someone who is curious and wants to learn. And that is all you have are trial and error with new technologies, with new streaming platforms. Like we're using Riverside right now.
We had some trials and errors.
We did. We had some trials and errors yesterday with Riverside.
Yeah. But that's the thing is we didn't just throw it out.
No.
I did have that as a suggestion. I was like, should we just try a new one? But we adapted, right?
Right.
Like we had some major tech challenges and we adapted. That's why we're sitting here together instead of in separate rooms. And that's the thing is like, if you just look at failures and you just say that, okay, well, that didn't work out, so we're just going to go in a totally different direction. And you don't try to think of a solution to make it work.
Right.
That's valuable.
Right. And I think the value that I bring as a consultant is that I have fucked up so many times and I've seen every scenario. So I know how to prevent you from fucking up. Like that's a thing we can all kind of, there's two things in our industry, which is, creating space for learning. So when we go to these digital communications conferences, the most valuable presentations are people do entire case studies of where they use the technology. It's failed them. They were scared for their life and they fixed it. Right. So it's kind of that whole process and how that was part of the corporate culture. So those were the best presentations. We also see people taking to social media, talking about these things now. And I think that's just changing the industry. So it's changing how we talk about failure. It's about pivoting, like you mentioned. It's about the mistakes, but it's also about sharing the learnings and just creating these networks and cultures of people across the board who are like, I tried that, didn't work. I don't want you to... I don't want my fellow millennial to fail at this particular technology. So, chances are there's somebody that have been through that, and creating that open dialogue, I think is like, that is the point we want to get to, especially when it comes to new technology and that kind of stuff as well.
You talked about entrepreneurs and actually brought to mind, I'm working on this other project. It's a video project where we are profiling companies that are daring to be different in some way. And it's been fascinating. The one thing that jumped out to me in talking to some of these companies that have been very successful, and they're at various stages, like some of them are still in startup mode, some of them are very established. But one thing that they all have had in common so far is that somewhere along the way, what they were doing wasn't working. There wasn't a market for it. The customer didn't want to pay for it. There was some situation.
Right.
but they didn't throw it out. They actually adapted and pivoted, right? And they did it multiple times to the point where they became very successful. And so I think about the term fail fast in entrepreneur culture. And again, I think we're using the wrong language, because this notion of, okay, start a company. If it doesn't work, scrap that, start something else.
It's not back to the drawing board every time. No.
It shouldn't be.
No.
Because like, it's, first of all, you didn't learn anything. And I go back to this, the value of trying to figure out a solution and trying to make something work. That's skill building. Mm-hmm. And I think, I was saying to somebody the other day, is I'm grateful to have grown up without the internet and with things like paper maps and not smartphones, because I think it forced us to figure things out, mm-hmm. right? Because there was no easy answer. And I noticed, and I'm not going to out anybody of like a young generation, but let's say some teenagers that one got stuck in an elevator and sent me a text message of the elevator going, "What do I do?" I was like, that would never have been possible as a kid. Like, you would just have to figure it out, because nobody would have known you were in there, or you would just live in there forever.
Did she press the phone button?
Well, it turns out she just had to scan my fob and press the...
Oh, she wasn't stuck in an elevator. No. Literally. It wasn't an emergency situation.
She didn't know how to work it.
Gotcha.
That's a whole thing. But anyway, it's just, I look at it as leaders. It's our job, yes, to create a space where people feel safe to try new things, but also to foster that culture of building resilience and adaptability, because that's more important. I had a mentee talk to me. She was upset about some small mistakes she made working with a new boss. And I said to her, if I had to choose between someone who did something perfectly every single time and someone who made some mistakes but was able to correct them, or, was able to course correct before they became big mistakes, I would choose that person, because life is messy, work is messy. It doesn't go perfectly all the time.
Right.
And if you have built the skill of being able to adapt and fix things, that's a valuable skill. If somebody who does something perfectly every time, at some point, something's going to fuck up and they are going to freak out. And I don't want the freak out person. I want the person who's like, I fucked up, I'll fix it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the extreme, right?
Yeah.
So it's the extreme, and I talk a lot about this idea of perfection disguised as strategy. So perfectionism can take many faces, but usually, I've seen people kind of take for fear of fucking up, take a project and not keep dwelling on it, keep the feedback loop going, all of these things, right? And all of these approvals, because they just are too afraid to release it, because they're afraid to fail and their perfectionism gets in the way. But then they always kind of spin it like, well, we haven't thought through this, or we haven't thought through that. Next thing you know, it's like 6 months later and nothing's happened. So I think that's a big part of it too, kind of that extreme other side where we have the complete fear of failure, which isn't good either. And so you talk a lot about, the feedback loop or not trying new things at all because of the failure. So how do you deal with that extreme?
Yeah, I think it's going to sound maybe a little bit strange, but it actually starts early. So I think you break the fear of failure by prioritizing and valuing creativity and ideas, and then sanctioning action. So an example of something I used to do with teams, but actually as an entrepreneur now, I do this with people who hire me to work with their teams. And it's a technique called brain sprouting. But basically, it's all about idea generation, as opposed to brainstorming where you have people like pontificating. There's rules in brain sprouting. You're not allowed to argue. There's you just throw ideas on the table.
You're planting seeds.
Yeah.
It sounds very welcoming.
Yeah. It's like gardening creativity, basically. Right. And so, but the concept was that I would take multidisciplinary teams, people of different areas, and I would throw maybe a challenge or a problem or a topic from one area on the table, and everybody would throw ideas in, no matter what their role was, because everybody has something to contribute. And actually, one of the startup companies I mentioned, they do this too, and they were saying to me that the best ideas they've gotten are from non-subject matter experts. So
Awesome.
this notion of fostering creativity and ideas, but in an inclusive way, that is the starting point. So you can't talk about failures because you're too late at that point. You have to start with creativity and do it in an inclusive way. And we actually had one of our guests tell us off air that fully inclusive workplaces outperform any other workplace by 6-fold, and from a revenue perspective by 8-fold.
Yeah.
And so that's the starting point, I think, from the feedback loop. Then once you've got these ideas on the table, you as the leader say to the person who's responsible, you have the ideas. Now you decide what is actionable. You go off and action it, but you have to do something. Not actioning is not an option. And then, bring it back to us and tell us what you learned.
I love this because I experienced this as a junior staffer. So I had that leadership support to change something. So I had fucked up information sharing. I worked in emergency management for years. I'd done a lot of different emergency management communications. As a more junior person, I was learning constantly, right? And you learn trial by fire when there's a disaster. So I had made a mistake. And as a result, I wanted to fix it. So the first way I fixed it was to, and this is a difficult thing to do, I think, for some, but and it was hard for me too, was to find the people that it affected and I had fucked up, and it had affected them in a negative way, and make them part of the solution.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'd invited them in, made them part of the solution. We kind of discussed ways to make sure it didn't happen again. We came up with a proposal. And at this time, I'm going to talk about digital communications because that's what I know. It was sort of the newfangled flashy thing to use, and we were all kind of learning how to use it and how to orient it and how to incorporate it in emergency management at that time. So you have the buy-in from the folks that it had affected, but you really do need that leadership buy-in too to take it to the next level. And so I was experiencing exactly what you had talked about. So we had come up with a solution. We presented it to our executive team. They loved it. They allowed us to have the freedom to kind of incorporate it and make it happen. But in order for them to do that, they would have had to acknowledge that something had fucked up under their watch.
Yeah.
And so you kind of need everybody to talk about their role in it for everybody to talk about their role in fixing it.
And take accountability for their role in it too.
Yeah.
And so when there's a fuck up, there's no one person you're pointing a finger at. Everybody shares a little bit of that. But I think the other thing too is acknowledging is great. So it's like, okay, let's acknowledge there was a fuck up. We all have a role in fixing it, but not dwelling on how did this happen. That's another thing I find organizations do wrong when they try to normalize failure is they're like, okay, this thing didn't go well, so let's dissect why it didn't go well. And I think that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Instead of dissecting why something didn't go well or why something fucked up, you should be, like you said, gathering everybody who has a stake in it and figuring out how to fix it. That's where the gold is. That's where the value is, instead of hashing out, okay, who didn't do what and why didn't this happen?
Yeah, because that changes the conversation, right? So you're taking it from a creativity mindset and you're trying to encourage creativity. You're taking it then when you act that way to a blame mindset. People are going to have a visceral reaction to it. Yep. They're not going to want to contribute. So there's also the intention around fuck up and fix it. So it's like, am I reacting and admitting my faults and my fuck ups, and am I fixing it because I want to cover my ass, or am I fixing it because I want to make the processes easier? I want to make the culture better. I want to do those things. And in order to do that, that does include a lot of people. So I think that's something to watch out for.
Celebrate the fix, not the fucking failure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Celebrate the triumph.
Yes.
Come on.
That's worth celebrating. And again, so whether you call it pivots or fixes or whatever, like get around a table with the team and go, we really pulled this one out of the ditch and we should celebrate that because that was amazing. And that's, I go, and I think about as well, one of our guests, Gavin, talking about values. And he said that he learned more about his values from when he made a mistake or chose something against his values or when they were challenged. And so I think that's the nugget that you need to think about when it comes to fuck ups, is basically you learn more from fixing, from focusing on solutions, from pulling the car out of the ditch than you do from just sitting there going, we hit the ditch. And but the other thing you talked about that I want to acknowledge from a leader perspective is the freedom, right? So
yes.
So in order for the team to actually try new things, they can't have to go and mother may I every 5 minutes.
No.
And go, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I do this? That's not a freedom to try new things. But also acknowledging that some fuck ups are bigger than others and more impactful than others. So actually I learned this recently and I thought it was brilliant. And I'm admittedly a little surprised it came from a big company. I have a bias towards smaller companies. AWS, Amazon Web Services, they have a series of leadership mechanisms. And this one, I think it's great through the context of giving people the freedom to try new things, but with guardrails. So they have this thing where they say, is it a one-way door or a two-way door? A one-way door is, this is irreversible.
Right.
And we can't go back. A two-way door is, okay, we could go back. There might be some sunk costs. There might be some this or that, but it's not irreversible. It's not a done deal. And so you can make decisions independently if it's a two-way door. Mm-hmm. But if it's a one-way door, then you need to kind of have a risk conversation with your leader, or you have to do whatever you have to do in the business. And I think for me, that's a great shorthand for giving the team the ability to make some independent decisions and try some new things.
I love that analogy because, every decision, they say, well, one door closes, one door opens. Well, what kind of door is it? Mm-hmm. We can totally look at that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I have a few takeaways from this. I think the big thing I learned from you chatting with you today is that, don't just use failure as a buzzword. Pivot, change the way you perceive it, and, live it. Right. So look at opportunities, look at failure as an opportunity to pivot. Let's not just constantly use the word fail, or
let's not say failure at all.
Totally. We could just say fuck up and fix it.
It's
right?
Not because we're afraid of it, but because failure,
what does it serve?
Failure is not the goal or the end result.
Right. That's totally it. And it's also just changing our mindset around it.
Yes.
And creating and finding supportive spaces to talk about mistakes and learnings, which is what I think is key. Make this conversation an essential part of the creativity process. Mm-hmm. So it's all part of a process. It's just, one step, one bump in the journey. And it has to, like we said, it has to involve a lot of people.
Yes.
To find a real creative solution with the right intention. And the big one we learned as well, and we've talked about this on previous episodes, is let people talk about their failures and mistakes. Don't do it for them, and don't assume someone's experience. So those are a few of my takeaways. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Lynette?
I might just add one kind of add on to that last one of if you're the leader, talk openly about your own. So in addition to don't talk about other people's, you have to be the one to talk about your own. It goes back to that accountability piece, because if you're going to say to people, it's okay to make a mistake. We want you to focus on fixing it, but it's okay to make mistakes here. You have to actually model that.
Right.
Everything you say is okay. You actually have to model that behavior. So talk about your own mistakes and how you fixed your fuck ups or not. Ideally you would, or how, even better, how you gathered a team to help you fix them and how you enlisted help, because that also gives people then permission to ask for help and not feel like they have to fix them on their own.
You've been there. That's why you're in the chair.
So you can't say we don't speak our mind. And I think we've hit our F word quota for the season now in this one episode. I'll be interested to see I don't think we're going to get hate mail over this necessarily, but I'd be interested to see some reactions to this episode. Again, one thing I'm proud of from this season is that we have challenged some traditional perspectives and even new perspectives, right? And I think that's the goal. Is somebody says, oh, this is a new thing that we're all doing. Well, maybe question it. Why? And what are we trying to accomplish here? And maybe we're missing the mark. We're all about questioning things and challenging perceptions. So we also want to hear what you think, our listeners. We want to hear what you think about this concept of embracing failure. Did we get it wrong? I mean, I'm not going to agree with you because I think we got it right, but I want to hear if you think we got it wrong. I want to hear your perspective. I want to hear your examples. We also always love a good fuck up and fix it story. So if you've got something like that, share that with us. And please remember to tune in to the next episode, because I can't guarantee there's going to be as many fucks dropped, but it's going to be spicy. You know it is. So until next time, until we see you again, stay spicy.
Hallelujah.
Thanks for listening to the Stay Spicy podcast.
We love hearing from our listeners and want you to be part of our community. So connect with us on social media at Stay Spicy Inc.
And visit us online at stayspicy.ca.